We learned all about our limiting constraint in the previous videos with the budget line. So exactly what we can do is going to be limited by how much income we have. And what exactly are we trying to do with this income? We're trying to maximize our utility, a hypothetical measure of the satisfaction one receives from consuming a good or service. So utility is just a different way for us to say your happiness or your satisfaction. And there are a few things about utility that we want to go ahead and talk about before we get into the sort of raw analysis of it. So utility does differ from person to person. So we can consume the same exact good, do the same exact task, but it is in reality in application going to be different from person A to B to C and so on down the line. We just sort of attach an arbitrary or random number. It just tells us exactly that, hey, we're getting this amount of satisfaction or this amount of happiness from doing this particular task. And because we can sort of attach a number to this particular sort of good or service, we can go ahead and rank all of our choices. So we can say that if we watch, say, 10 hours of Netflix, this will give us 500 units of satisfaction or utility. If you want to listen to this lecture video, that'll give you, say, maybe 100 units of satisfaction or utility. And of course, you are always going to want to choose a task that is going to give you the highest amount of satisfaction or utility. In this case, watch Netflix because it gives you 500 units of satisfaction versus listening to this lecture, which only gives you 100 units of satisfaction. Another thing to note about utility itself is that it can actually go ahead and turn negative as well. So here, suppose that you go ahead and take a look at the salad right here. If you consume the salad right here, it'll give you, say, negative 300 units of satisfaction because who really puts this type of shrimp and oranges on a salad? It's a really weird combination. So also to note that, hey, satisfaction and utility can actually turn negative for particular goods and services. So we can rank our sort of choices based on the amount of utility that we have. Utility can actually turn negative, and it does differ from person to person with just utility. And we can actually break down utility into two different sort of categories. We can take a look at total utility or marginal utility. Total utility is a total satisfaction from consuming a given quantity of a good or service. And this is exactly what we're trying to maximize, our total utility. So examples of this is, suppose that you watch, say, 10 hours of Netflix, that'll give you 500 units of satisfaction. If you eat 5 tequeños, that'll give you, say, maybe 300 units of satisfaction. It just tells you exactly how much satisfaction, utility, or happiness you get for doing this particular task or consuming this unit of goods, this number unit of goods. If you don't know what tequeños are, they're essentially these sort of fried breaded cheese sticks. They're very, very delicious. I highly recommend you eat them if you haven't before. However, in order for us to maximize our total utility, we make our decisions on marginal utility. So remember the keyword marginal, our additional utility. So additional satisfaction or happiness from consuming one more unit of a good or service. So we want to go ahead and see exactly how much additional utility you get for consuming one more unit of the good. So if you consume one more hour of Netflix, you watch one more hour of Netflix, how much additional satisfaction do you get? Maybe you get 50 additional units of satisfaction from that. If you eat one more tequeño, maybe you get 30 additional units of happiness from that. So with marginal utility, we want to go ahead and make our decisions on marginal utility itself because we're taking a look at exactly when we go from one unit to the next unit, how much additional satisfaction or happiness accrues to us. So based on these sort of ideas, there are actually equations that do attach themselves to marginal utility and total utility themselves. So let's go ahead and build them up. Like we said before, we are going to make our decisions on marginal utility, so the additional utility itself. Utility. So here, marginal utility, in order to calculate this out, we have change in total utility, total utility, divided by the change in quantity. So change in quantity. If we wanted to use shorthand notation, we can use the triangles, the deltas. So change in total utility divided by the change in quantity. So remember, with these changes, we need to be taking some type of difference in this sort of case right here. So we go from row 1 to row 2, row 2 to row 3, and then so on down the line. So here, marginal utility, this is exactly how we're going to be maximizing our total utility. And total utility is going to be the sum of the marginal utilities. Sum of marginal utilities. And we'll work with a chart to show you exactly what we mean by this. So sum of marginal utilities. So if we want to find the total utility for, say, watching 3 hours of Netflix, we need to go ahead and add up the marginal utility for the first hour of Netflix, the second hour of Netflix, and the third hour of Netflix in order to get total utility for 3 hours of Netflix in total. So a very sort of typical table that you're going to see in this sort of chapter right here with total utility and marginal utility is going to look something like this. We have two goods, the goods that we've been taking a look at. We have pizza on the left-hand side and wall climbing on the right-hand side, and 3 columns for each of these goods. The quantity, the total utility, and the marginal utility. So same thing on the wall climbing side. So we focus in on the pizza good right here. We take a look at the quantity, row number one, column number 1. It's just telling us exactly how many units of this good are we consuming. 0 units of pizza, 1 unit of pizza, 2 units of pizza, and then so on down the line. Column number 2 is a total utility attached with consuming that quantity of pizza. If we consume 1 pizza, we get 70 units of satisfaction. If we consume 3 pizzas, we get 100 units of happiness. If we consume 5 units of pizza, we get 250 units of satisfaction or utility. Column number 3 is going to be our marginal utility, and marginal utility is exactly going to be the change in total utility divided by the change in quantity. So as we go from row 1 to row 2, what is the change in our utility? Row 2 to row 3, what is the change in our utility? And then so on down the line. So we can actually go ahead and see exactly how we get these specific numbers right here. So how exactly do we get the 70 for marginal utility for pizza right here? So we can go ahead and use our equation that we have, change in total utility divided by the change in quantity. So here, let's go ahead and take a look at pizza. Pizza, as we go from a quantity of 0 to a quantity of 1. So here, what is the change in our total utility as we go from a quantity of 0 to a quantity of 1? As we go from quantity of 0 to quantity of 1, the change in our total utility, it goes from 0 to 70. So essentially the difference between these two numbers is going to be the change in our total utility. So 70 minus 0. So we can go ahead and write that down. So 70 minus 0. That's going to be in the numerator right here. That's a change in our total utility. What is the change in our quantity? This is going to be the easy one right here. We go from 0 units of pizza to 1 unit of pizza. So 1 minus 0. That gives us 1 minus 0 on the bottom. We simplify as much as we can. So this is our marginal utility for pizza as we consume 0 units of pizza to 1 unit of pizza. So that's exactly how that 70 shows up in this particular example. How do we get this 60 right here? We go ahead and use the same exact methodology, except now we take a look at when we go from 1 unit of pizza to 2 units of pizza. Our total utility went from 70 units to 130 units, so we take the difference between these numbers right here and divide them through. So here, do another example. We go from a quantity of 1, quantity equals to 1, to a quantity equals to 2. So that'll give us 130 minus 70. So remember, this is the total utility for consuming 2 units of pizza, total utility for consuming 1 unit of pizza. Divide that by 2 minus 1, because that is our change in quantity, and this will give us 60 units of marginal utility in this instance. So as you notice, with marginal utility, we're going to go from row to row in order to calculate this out. And there's also sort of a unique feature that we have right here, because typically when we consume one particular good, we go by 1 additional unit. So you notice here we go from 1 unit to 2 units to 3 units. We can actually use some type of zigzag pattern in order to get our marginal utility. So suppose that we don't have any of these numbers right here in the 3rd column. We only have the numbers that we have in the 2nd column. So we go here, 0 plus what number will give us 70? So 0 plus 70 will give us 70. So that's exactly where that 70 pops up. 70 plus what number will give us 130? That's going to be 60. 130 plus what number will give us 180? 50, and then so on down the line. So anytime we have a change in quantity by 1, or just a change of 1 in the denominator, this zigzag pattern will work out fairly well. So 70 plus 60, 130, 130 plus 50, 180, 180 plus 40 will give us 220, and then 220 plus 30 will give us 250 right here. So you do really want to be cognizant on whether or not we're changing the quantities by 1 or not, because if we don't change the quantities by 1, then the zigzag pattern will not work out very, very well. So just do be very cognizant of that fact. Final thing that we want to note right here is, remember we said that the sum of marginal utilities will give us the total utility. So how do we get the total utility for 3 units of pizza? Well, suppose we didn't have any of these numbers right here in the 2nd column, and we only had the marginal utility. Well, we go ahead and say, hey, go ahead and add up the marginal utility for the first unit, the second unit, and the third unit of pizza, and that will give us a total utility for the 3 pizzas that are going to be consumed. So 70 plus 60 plus 50, that'll give us 130 plus 50, so 180. That'll give us this exact 180 that we have right here. So here, there are a lot of relationships that do develop between total utility and marginal utility. Remember that we are trying to maximize our total utility among both of these goods, but we are going to have to make our decisions based on marginal utility, or the additional utility that we get for consuming one more unit of this particular good. So this will lay down the foundations about the similarities and differences of total utility and marginal utility. And we want to go ahead and take a closer look at marginal utility once again, because this is going to give us it's basically going to tell us exactly how we make our decisions under marginal utility analysis. One final note before we sort of end this sort of video right here. One thing that you should notice in column number 3 and column number 6 is something unusual happening within our marginal utilities. So as we increase the amount of pizza that we eat, as we increase the amount of wall climbing hours that we sort of do, what is something that you see happening with our marginal utilities for each of these goods? We'll go ahead and take a closer look at what happens here in the next section.